Legend has it that a restaurant executive got the idea for the drive-thru fast food window after visiting his local bank's drive-thru window. I don't know if that's exactly how that happened, but the bigger lesson is that there are lessons for us everywhere, especially in places we wouldn't expect. I primarily talk about home studio music production on this channel, but today we're checking out an interview with one of my favorite guitarists because it's dripping with concepts that we can apply to our own music in our home studios. If we haven't met yet, my name's Joe Gilder. I've been coaching musicians on how to make music in a home studio since 2009, and today we're going to talk about another Joe Bonamassa. Joe is a monster guitar player, blues guitar player, who tours nonstop, but also takes the time to do lots of interviews on the internet for the benefit of folks like us. Now, if you're not a guitar player or aren't interested in blues guitar, neither of those things matter, because what Joe talks about in this interview, while he's talking about it in context of being a guitar player, is hugely beneficial to those of us who record, produce, mix, and even master in our home recording studios. Also, fun note, Joe's the reason that I play this. This is the Dunlop Jazz 3 pick. It's tiny. It doesn't bend. I love it so much. Acoustic, electric, this is my go-to pick. But that's beside the point. Let's dive into the interview.
We were talking about the all the different variables that affect the tone and how you have to kind of know what you're hearing here is not going to be heard elsewhere.
Yeah. I can address it 3 points.
Yeah.
I think every guitar player or musician should invest at some point in their life in a 31 band graphic equalizer.
31 band.
31 band.
Okay.
And not for the sake of they're going to need it as part of their road kit or their studio kit or whatever. They need to go through and plug their instrument into it, or their vocal or anything.
Mm-hmm.
Drums.
Yeah.
Ever. And you need to then go through every frequency and identify what it does.
Oh, I see.
So you can speak intelligently to sound people. Mm-hmm. You can speak intelligently to other musicians, and you can also set up your gear to where you understand that, well, ride cymbals are somewhere between 5 and 8K. You know, zildjian Ks are 10 to 12K.
Yes.
Okay. Kick drum lives somewhere between 60 hertz and 83 hertz. Okay. Bass is a little bit above that, between 100 and 250. And the guitar, in at least my case, lives between 350 hertz and about 1 to 2.5K.
Okay, what's he getting at with the 31 band EQ, and what does that have to do with us in the studio? This is the EQ, in case you're not familiar. It's literally 31 individual little narrow EQ bands, and you can go in and adjust each of these frequencies independent of each other. It's typically used in live sound for ringing out monitors so they don't feed back, or tuning the room. If you're using a PA system and moving from one room to the next every night for a different show, each room sounds different, so you're going to want to tune it differently. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about using it as an educational tool to help you become a better musician, but really a better producer, better mix engineer. So you don't need to buy one of these. $250. Save your $250. I'll show you how to do it inside of your software. So here is a blank session, and I'm going to show you a couple different ways to pull this off. I'm going to pull in my band's latest single. It's called All Again, and we're going to use this section right here, I think. Let's listen to it. That's so much fun. All right, so we've got the song here, and what we're going to do is, the easiest way to do this is I want to teach you how to listen to the different groups of frequencies. The first step, and kind of what Joe is suggesting, is just put an EQ on here and take one of the bands of the EQ, do a boost with it, and make it pretty narrow, and then just jump around to the different frequencies to see what's happening in those frequencies. So here's what that sounds like. If you're thinking, what's happening down at like 50 hertz? Here's what that sounds like. If you're listening on a phone, you didn't hear anything. If you're on speakers or headphones, you probably heard there's extra like deep low end there. And then like, let's switch to, you can just click and type in the number. So we're at 50 now. Let's switch to 100. Okay, that's a different sound. Now let's switch to 200. So that's what we're talking about here. Joe is talking about going over each of these frequencies and boosting. You could also just slide this over slowly over an entire mix and kind of spend a little time listening to each group of frequencies, and you'll learn so much. Let's do it right now. By the way, pro tip, if you're scrolling and you realize it's jumping faster than you want, most softwares, if you hold down Shift and then click and drag, it's going to move it at a much slower pace, like this. I love doing that way too much. Okay, so that's what Joe's talking about. I'm going to show you a way to make it even better. If you're a Studio One user, I'll show you what to do. It's literally just a matter of pressing this S button. This is a solo button that just solos that band of frequencies. If you're going to do this, maybe go a little bit wider, and then do the same experiment, only this time with the solo engaged, and you'll only hear that group of frequencies. It's incredibly educational. Super, super interesting. I'm going to explain why this matters. You may think, Joe, you're just making weird sounds. But we're learning one of our language as musicians, especially as if you call yourself an engineer as well, like audio engineer, you're doing recording and mixing, you're doing more of the technical stuff. One of the languages we speak is the language of frequencies. And you can't be fluent in the language of frequencies if you're not super clear on what 200 hertz sounds like. If I say, hey, what does 200 hertz sound like? And you go, it's kind of low. Can you hear it in your head? I say 200 hertz and you immediately hear kind of this whoa, whoa, whoa sort of a sound. If not, you haven't become fluent in the frequency language yet. And that's totally fine. Nobody's fluent when they start. But if you make that a goal of yours, to spend enough time with things like EQ and doing this exercise to where when I say 200 hertz, you immediately hear like this sound. You know, like that's the muddiness, but like the ring of a snare drum, things like that. Then you suddenly open up all kinds of possibilities for yourself in producing music because you're hearing things in the frequencies they live in versus just saying that thing is kind of has some low end to it. You can be very specific. Is it a 50 hertz problem or is it a 100 hertz problem? Because those things are literally an octave away from each other. One is almost nothing like the other, but we tend to glob all of them together in our minds, and it makes us less effective in the studio. Now, there's a way to do this. If you don't happen to have an EQ that allows you to do this, here's a simple way to do what I just showed you. Take the track, duplicate it completely. So now you have two tracks. And then pick one of those tracks and just flip the polarity, or some people call it phase. In Studio One, I've got to turn on input controls. And so I'm just going to flip the polarity of one of them. I've got an EQ on both. And so if I hit play now, we should hear just silence because they're completely canceling each other out. So now I just take an EQ on one of them, and whatever I do with the EQ, that's all I'm going to hear. Here's what that sounds like. Now, it's not perfect because we're still hearing the other frequencies due to the way like the software is processing it, but it's a cheap and easy way to do this if you don't have an EQ that allows you to solo individual bands. You can very quickly learn what they sound like. Okay, so we're talking about knowing what frequencies are. Joe very accurately spells out which frequency ranges each instrument lives in. What does that have to do with us and making music?
The minute you sit down with a real drummer, all that goes to shit.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Then sit down with a Hammond B3 player, or a keyboard player, piano player, and a bass player. Next thing you know, I can't hear myself.
Yes.
Well, wait a minute. It sounded the same settings, same amp, same chain, everything in the same room.
Yeah.
Well, what's happening? It's being eaten alive by frequencies
Yes.
that you probably need to identify. And some of the biggest guitar sounds that you hear on record, whether it be Eddie Van Halen, Jimmy Page, Paul Kossoff, Eric Clapton, if you soloed those guitar sounds,
Yes.
and you listen to it just on a flat set of speakers,
Right.
you're going, it's not EQ'd as large as I'm perceiving it to be.
I mean, come on, slow clap. When you listen to the solo guitars on your favorite record, they're not nearly as big frequency-wise as you think they are. You perceive them as huge and monstrous, but in reality, they're a lot thinner and a lot more contained than maybe what you realized. It's time for a visual aid. Hold on. Okay, here's the idea. Here's the very low end of our frequency, our ability to hear. This is 20 hertz. This is 20K, okay? 20 and 20. And it goes along this way. The idea that he's talking about is everybody kind of has their own space across this frequency spectrum. So if these are the low frequencies, which go up to, let's say 100 hertz, and let's say these are the low mids that go 100 to 300, and the mids are somewhere in like 300 to maybe 1K, and then high mids are 1K to let's say 5K, why not? And then the high frequencies are everything above that. So it's nice to have these all kind of laid out, but then if you can start thinking in terms of where do things live, then you start to see that like everybody has their own place, and that's what Joe's talking about. So like kick drum lives here. Bass kind of overlaps with kick drum a little bit. Bass comes in here. All right? And those, we talked about this in the last video, those take up your predominant chunk of your low end, okay? And then where do guitars come in? Guitars are green, of course. Guitars start to come in about here. These are our guitars. And so then what's left? Well, there's not a lot left. You can have kind of some of your cymbals up here from the drums. And if you're just a guitar, bass, and drums band, now you kind of know where everybody's got to live. You know that kick's going to live here, bass is going to live here. If you're asking about like, what about the snare drum? Well, snare's going to live kind of in here. And it's also going to have a big presence up in here. Okay? Can you start to see how if you try to make your guitar tone, and this is what Joe's getting at, you build your guitar tone at home and you make it cover all the frequencies. And you're like, this is my guitar tone. It might sound good by itself, and then you go start playing with a band, and you can't hear any of this stuff down here because these guys are covering it up. And understandably so. You gotta budget your frequencies, and you gotta like adjust your expectations and go down to something more reasonable, like have your guitar just live in this range instead of covering everything. Now, that doesn't mean that no two things can occupy a similar frequency range, but it's this idea of where is the essence of this instrument? Let me make sure that that is audible, and then let's get rid of the places where it's not helpful. All that extra low end on a guitar, not helpful. Let's get rid of it so that there's space in the mix for something else. I like to think of my mix as a budget, and I've got only so much I can spend in each category of my budget, meaning each group of frequencies. There's only so much low end in a mix, and I reserve that for kick drum and bass. There's only so much low mid, kick and bass are in there, and then snare drum gets a little bit, and then maybe a little bit of guitars can sneak in there, but for the most part, I got to be really careful with my low mids that I don't overload it. Mid-range, I got to leave room in there for vocals and guitars and keyboards. They're really prominent in that mid-range, and there needs to be an equal balanced amount of all of them. Upper mids is where we get a lot of clarity. Too much in the upper mids, the mix sounds harsh and we hate it. So we got to make sure that we have enough clarity in the guitar and the kick and snare and bass. They need a little clarity up there. The vocal has to come through clearly there. But then if there's too much of any one of those, that starts to feel out of balance. And then the high frequencies are reserved for just the high frequency, air on the vocal, cymbals, top end of acoustic guitars, things like that. This is such a good way of thinking about your overall mix, but it's also incredibly helpful in thinking about how to produce. If you've got a band like I do, that's kick, bass, or it's drums, bass, and guitar, and all you do are really thick guitar parts, you're missing out on a huge range of frequencies because kick and bass already handle most of the thick stuff in the low end, so maybe you can bring other frequency ranges into the equation. Maybe play on the brighter pickup, maybe play through brighter amp settings, maybe play higher up on the neck. Maybe when you're overdubbing, don't overdub more and more low parts, have some parts in the upper frequencies as well. This is the way to record in such a way that when you go to mix, you're not having to go and do a ton of problem solving because you solved a lot of those problems at the source by choosing parts that make sense. Joe's talking about playing with a loud drummer, bass player, a B3 organ, which has all the frequencies if you let it, other guitar players, piano player, singers. All of that, they all have to fit together on stage. And obviously he's a solo guitarist, so his guitar needs to have some front and centerness. But even he knows, as nice as it is to play guitar and have big bassy low end come out of it, that's not his job. So he gets the bass out of his tone so that the bass guitar and the kick drum can shine, and it serves the song better than if he were to go all out. So big lesson here from a mixing and recording standpoint. It doesn't matter at all what it sounds like in solo. It's almost completely irrelevant because what it sounds like in solo might be big and beefy and full and make you want to like pump your fists in the sky, but then you put it back into the mix and it's a hot mess of too many frequencies colliding. That's not good. I heard a presentation once from, I think it was Blue Microphones, and they were talking about everybody wants these nice, flat, articulate microphones, but in reality, they don't want that in the mix. They don't want all the frequencies there. They just want a certain number of frequencies. They talked about a mix session where the mix engineer spent, it seems like a whole day or two trying to get the vocal mix right on this major label release. And when they finally got it right, the producer said, let me hear the vocal soloed. And it sounded harsh and tinny and kind of gross, but when they dropped it in the mix, it was perfect. Not to say that's going to be the case every single time, but that actually sparked the idea, I believe, was kind of the origin story for Blue Microphones. Instead of being nice, flat, perfectly pristine, picking up all the frequency type microphones, they have color and shape to them, so it sounds a little bit more mixed when you record them. I kind of like that idea. That makes a lot of sense to me. My hope for you is that this was a bit of an eye-opening moment about how thinking about frequencies is a recording and production decision almost more than it's a mixing and mastering decision. Make good choices about the tones that you record on the front end, and the rest of it gets a lot easier. By the way, this month we're doing one of our famous production challenges inside my VIP membership. We're using a song from one of our members, and all you have to do is download the tracks. There's a single, simple fingerstyle electric guitar and a lead vocal. And then your challenge is to produce that song however you want. We do a listening party at the end of the month to listen to the submissions. It's a blast. I hope you'll join us. You can take VIP for a free test drive. Just go to homestudiocorner.com/VIP. Also, if you haven't seen this video I did about some advice from Phineas, who is Billie Eilish's brother/producer, on how he goes through and thinks about production, definitely recommend watching that next. Thanks for watching. See ya.